Jesus told his disciples that some of them would not die before they saw the coming of the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Remember that? And that's where I did the to be continued, ... And then you had to wait an extra week to find out what that meant, since Pastor James was here last week. And he's back in Uganda. He wanted me to say thank you guys for loving him. And so they're back. He's back there. Now, at this point, many suggest that since all the disciples died and Jesus hasn't come back bringing his kingdom, that therefore Jesus is fallible and can't be trusted. That's because they haven't read the Bible. That's because for whatever reason they looked at it like, well, we just kind of see it differently. But chapter 17, what we're going to see is that Jesus takes 3 of his disciples up a mountain and is transfigured, showing his glory before they died. So yes, there were some of them that saw that. But I believe chapter 17 is so much more than just the revelation of God and his glory to 3 disciples. I believe that God has something special for us today. And this is how I know it. Because what this chapter does is it reveals to us truths about the Father. Truths about God the Father. And I say I believe there's something special because God had to orchestrate this in order for it to happen, because I'm not that smart. I couldn't figure out that we should do chapter 17 on Father's Day. I'm not that smart. I don't have that. Here's the reason I love teaching right through the Bible. I'm too dumb to come up with topics to teach on. My topics would be like how to tie your shoes, how to come out of your house with your pants facing the right way, how to make sure your shirt's not inside out. Those are the topics I would come up with. So I am so glad that what we do in our tradition is that we just take a book and go right from the beginning to the end, and then we go through the entire Bible, and then you know what happens when we finish? We do it over again. I'm so grateful for that. Because what it does is it shows me how God is in the details. Like today. You see, we've titled our theme, When God Breaks His Silence, because the book of Matthew comes at the end of 400 years of God not speaking to the nation of Israel. And then we have the Gospel of Matthew talking about the kingdom of God and Christ as the king. And so we said, when God broke his silence, and then we have our little tagline. And here's what we're going to see today, that when God broke his silence, the nature of the Father is revealed. And today we are going to understand a little bit more of the character and nature and the heart of God the Father. You see, what matters is what we see takes place on top of this mountain, but also in the valley and at the lake. Because those are 3 areas where God's going to reveal something to us. And so today what we're going to look at is we're going to look at 3 events that reveal the nature of God the Father. And the first aspect that we're going to see about God the Father is this, that he is a pleased and pursuing Father. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them." What a day. Jesus is like, "Hey guys, let's go for a hike. We're going to go up the mountain. We're going to hike up that mountain." And I'm wondering what the disciples thought that day. I'm sitting there thinking they're probably like, well, I really don't have the shoes for this. Do we have what we need? That's a big mountain. I'm not sure I want to go up that. That wasn't in my plans today, but I guess you're leading us, so let's do it. But you know what's funny is how many people spend so much time and energy trying to figure out which mountain they went up. It's crazy to me. There's like 5 or 6 different mountains that were high mountains that they could have gone up. And so everybody's like, well, was it this mountain? Well, it could have been. Was it this one? Here's what I know. We don't know which mountain because the Bible didn't tell us. Why didn't the Bible tell us? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which mountain they went up, but the fact that they went up is going to show us something. And yet, what I want us to be warned of is spending so much time on the things that don't matter that it causes us to miss what really does matter. And that is what took place on top of this mountain. So 6 days have passed since Jesus debated with the Sadducees and Pharisees in chapter 16. And now he takes Pete, James, and John up this mountain. And God's going to reveal something to them. He's got something special for them. What was it? That Jesus was going to be transfigured. That's what we're told. Jesus was transfigured and his face shone. And it was shining. It was glowing. Jesus was glowing. I wonder what they thought. I wonder if they freaked out. I mean, I've never seen somebody's face shine like is described here, but, I mean, the closest is what happened to Moses when he went on the mountain, but when he came down, he had to cover his face. But here they are, and Jesus is shining. But that's not all that happened. There they are with Jesus, and all of a sudden, some other guys show up. Moses and Elijah, they joined him. And we're told here that the 6 of these guys enjoyed a conversation together. I don't know about you, but doesn't that seem a bit odd? Like they're talking to 2 guys that died or were caught up. Like they are not like they didn't go up the mountain with us. And they just showed up on the mountain. How did that happen? Don't know. Doesn't matter. What were they talking about? What were their conversations? Again, it doesn't matter. So what we really need to ask ourselves is this: what can we learn from what we don't know? What could we learn for what took place on the mountain? And here's what I see. I see this. We must go up the mountain with Jesus from time to time so he could prepare us for life that takes place in the valley. It's important for us to go up the mountain. Why? Because when we do, what God does is he reveals to us the things that we are going to need to live the life that God has asked us to live faithfully here in the valley. Think about this for a second. What if these guys said, what if Peter, James, and John said, you know what? Not today, Jesus. I don't think I'm ready to go up the mountain. I'm not prepared. Think about all they would have missed out on. Think about what they wouldn't have understood. But then we have Peter. We pick it up with Peter here in verse 4. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. I picture this with such enthusiasm. And I think Peter really believes this. I think Peter is so excited. Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking. I think you should underline that. You see, while he was still speaking, all of a sudden, he hears this, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. So as Peter was saying this, God interrupts him. I love that. God's like, okay, Peter, I love you, but stop. Right? Peter, you're one of my kids, but we all have that one kid. right? And everybody's looking at him right now like, yeah, we do. We got that one. Why is everybody laughing? But as Peter saw him transfigured, even though death was the topic, according to Luke chapter 9, verse 31, Peter says this, it's good for us. It's good for us that we stay here. Peter wasn't thinking about anybody else. And I believe that that's why God interrupted him. It was as if God was saying, you know what, Peter, it's not just about you. It's not just about you. I invited you up here. I brought you up here because I wanted to reveal something to you, something that was going to be good for you, but also something that will be good for everybody else. You see, in Peter saying, hey, let us stay up here, what he's saying is this, why do we need to go back down? Why do we need to go back down the mountain? Why do we need to go into the valley? I know what's in the valley. I know the hardships. I know what we're going to face. I know what's to come, and I don't want to go. It's good to be here. Let's just stay on the mountain. Charles Spurgeon put it this way. He said, how selfish the one thought, it is good for us. What was to be done for the rest of the 12 and for the other disciples and for the wide, wide world. See, we gotta be thinking bigger than just ourselves. And that's what was happening here. God brought them up to show them that what they were going to be a part of was something bigger than themselves. And so as God the Father interrupted Peter, what he's saying is this. It's not about the three. It's about the one. Jesus, my beloved Son. Don't ever forget that, Peter. It's about Jesus. And yes, we need to go up the mountain to listen to the Father. Why? What does the mountain represent for us today? And I think it's interesting for us today. I think driving up the mountain is good for us. Do you want to know why? Because when you get up the mountain, you know what doesn't work? Your cell phone. It doesn't work. And you get frustrated. You know how I know? Because how many people do you see walking with their cell phones like this trying to get a service just so they can read a text? Who's texting me now? Who cares? It's not about who's texting you. You're up that mountain because God wants to speak to you. Are you going to hear that? You see, going up the mountain means to detach from the rest of the world so that you can attach yourself to what God is going to reveal to you. To his nature, to his character, to his heart, where he's going to illuminate to you the importance of Jesus Christ and what he has done for your life. And he's going to show you why you're up there, what he has for you to do when you go back down into the valley. And as we detach and as we go up that mountain, we will see that even what we don't understand illuminates what the Father wants to reveal to us, and that is this, that the Father is pleased with his children. Even when we don't get it. Even when we make mistakes. Now, Jesus didn't make mistakes, but he said, behold, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. But like we started communion with, we're heirs with Christ, meaning we're children of God, and he is pleased with us. But I'm not perfect. No, but he understands that. And because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross, we can know that the Father is pleased with us. And here what we see is that the Father is setting Jesus above the law, which was Moses, above the prophets, which was Elijah. He wasn't saying that Jesus is another law or a better lawgiver, or another prophet or a better prophet. No, he was saying Jesus is my begotten Son, whom I'm well pleased. And here's what I love about Peter, is at that moment he didn't get it, but when he came down the mountain, when he experienced life in the valley, when he continued to fail, because we know he hadn't yet denied Christ 3 times, but he also had not been restored in John 21 yet either. after that restoration, I believe it all came together for Peter, because Peter pens this in his epistle in 2 Peter 1, verse 16 through 18. He says, "For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power of the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came to him from the excellent glory. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And we heard this voice, which came from heaven, when we were with him on the holy mountain." He got it. But it goes on in verse 7. "And when Jesus came and touched them, he said, 'Arise and do not be afraid.'" Why? Because when the voice of God spoke, they fell down. "When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Now as they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, 'Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead.' And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?' Jesus answered and said to them, 'Indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands.' Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist." So they have some questions. But what I love about it is their questions didn't come until after Jesus touched them and lifted them up. Why? Because it was like Jesus understood that they were going to have questions. And he said, "Here's the deal. When you have questions, I want to look at your face. I want to look you in the eyes. I want you to know that I'm pleased with you, that I love you." God's voice knocked them down in brokenness, but Jesus' word, the word that became flesh, Jesus himself, picked them up with what? Tenderness. You didn't get it, but that's okay. Get on up. You see, we don't have to be afraid of the Father. We don't have to be afraid of the Father, even when we don't get it. And I know so many people struggle with God as a father, because we look at God as a father through the lens of the fathers that we had. And I will tell you this, being a father of 5 children, I have never known how big of a failure I was, because my children can point out my weaknesses better than anybody. And sometimes they do it graciously, and sometimes not so graciously. But you know what? What I've found is oftentimes they are correct. And I have to listen to them, and I have to humble myself, and I have to say, okay, there's got to be some weight behind what you're saying. I may not like it, I may not agree with it, but I'm going to trust that God's going to use this in my life. But we don't have to be afraid of God the Father, even when we don't get it. Why? Because when the dust settles, when the cloud goes away, what are we left with? Like the disciples, they were left with only Jesus. They weren't left with their shortcomings. They weren't left with their failures. They weren't left with their fears. They weren't left with their, the reasons that they fell down. No, they were left with Jesus. And that did something to them. You see, God said on Mount Sinai, "Thou shalt not." And then he gave the 10 Commandments. And we all fall down in humility when we lay our lives next to those. But going up the mountain, God revealed to them Jesus in his glory. But he also revealed to them the means to which he would accomplish our adoption. The price that Jesus would have to pay, because that's exactly what Jesus accomplished on this earth. He paid for our adoption. He paid the price to make us his. John 1:12 and 13 says, "But as many as received him, to him he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." God's intention was to adopt us from the beginning. Charles Spurgeon had another good one. He said this: if the Father says, "This is my Son," observe the graciousness of our adoption. With such a Son, the Lord had no need of children. He did not make us his children because he needed sons, but because we needed a father. So here, God's glory reveals the Father, the heart of the Father that is pleased, but also the Father that pursues his children whom he loves. The second thing that we're going to see as they're down in the valley is that the Father is persistent. Verse 14. And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." Then Jesus answered and said, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. At first glance, you're probably like, man, Jesus was a bit frustrated. How would he talk to him that way? And again, we miss the point here. Because here's the point. Number one, the first point is they came down the mountain. And when they did, they were faced with a multitude, showing us where ministry takes place. You see, ministry happens when we rise from our knees on the mountain to meet people in their problems in the valley. We have to come down the mountain. And what did the disciples see that day as they came down the mountain? Well, they saw a multitude. Well, true. But let's break it down even deeper. You see, I think sometimes we stop there. We stop at the surface because it's easier. It's easier to say, well, he saw a multitude. But he saw so much more. They saw so much more that day. They saw the very people that made up the multitude. The people that had unique names, who had unique stories, who had unique hurts, that were grieving and affected by the sins of this world. You see, when we go up the mountain, we meet God in his glory. When we come down, we see humanity as God sees humanity. And we take the time to hear their names and to hear their stories, to have our hearts broken. The disciples, when they came down, they saw hopelessness. They saw a multitude. They saw a father in grief. They saw a boy with epilepsy. They saw disciples who could do nothing about the problem, that felt like failures. But yet, they also saw a God who, at that moment, could have gone to a heaven, but chose to come down that mountain in Jesus to provide hope for all people. Knowing that it would eventually take him to the cross as he ascended up another mountain and died to deal with the issues. They heard the stories. They saw the people. They had their hearts broken. Guys, if we're going to see people's lives change, it's got to start with us going up the mountain, seeing the glory of God, but then coming down the mountain and seeing the people the way God sees them. I mean, think about it. This dad lived with the reality of a son with epilepsy that would fall into the water and fall into the fire. A dad who could do nothing about it. A dad who I'm sure went to great lengths to have the son's situation change, but to no avail. Who even brought his son to the disciples whom he thought would be able to heal him, and they themselves couldn't do it. Then you have a son who's stuck in a body that all of a sudden, for no reason, just starts shaking, seizing up, wondering, God, why? Why did you create me this way? Why did you cause me to be born into this world with a disability that I have to endure for the rest of my life? God, if you're a loving God, why did you do that? The hopelessness. And then the other 9. God, why did you bring us here to be met with this boy only to not enable us to be able to do anything about it? I thought you cared. I thought you... Talk about a hopeless situation. And then it goes on, verse 19. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief, for assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. So discouraged by their lack of ability, his disciples asked, why could we do nothing? Their failure taught them and us, really, that we should not get into a mechanical rut when it comes to dealing with people in ministry in general. You see, I think sometimes what happens is we get really comfortable in how we do things. And we just expect God to do this, to work the same way He's worked in the past. And we just think if I do this and this and this, and this is going to be the outcome. But that's not what Jesus said. He says, no, this comes out only by prayer and fasting. You see, these guys wanted success. Why couldn't we be successful? But they didn't want faith. And it was faith that was the only way to meet this boy's needs. Faith that manifests itself through prayer and fasting. Well, what does prayer and fasting demonstrate to us? I'll tell you what it does. It's the way that we identify willingly with the hurts that people are experiencing. It says, I see that you're hurting and I'm willing to give up something so that I could feel your pain, so that I could feel your sorrow, so that I can humble myself and make myself available to the God who I believe is persistent and wants to heal you. It gave him an appreciation for the supernatural and the demonic reality of the world that we live in. It gave them a desire to depend upon God and to fight and sacrifice for the sake of somebody else. You see, this day shows us the heart of God as we see a father being very persistent on behalf of his son. And this is where it's hard. This is where God the Father says, Dad, don't ever give up on your kids. Don't ever give up. Be persistent. Come up that mountain. You're going to need it. Because you're going to have to go to the valley where you're going to see the people that you care about hurting. And you're going to feel like you can do nothing about it. But don't give up. And what we see about the Father's heart here is this: that he hasn't given up on our kids. He hasn't given up on us. He is persistent. And he loves them. Why? Because he paid the price to adopt them. And the last thing that we're going to see in verses 22 through 27 is we're going to see the provision of a father. And it's going to kind of come about in a different way. But you'll see God providing. It says, while they were still staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And the third day he will be raised up." And they were exceedingly sorrowful. So in light of the transfiguration, in light of their failures, in light of their disappointment, what does Jesus do? He shares his fate with them. He says, I'm headed to the cross. This is what's going to happen to me. And obviously this caused them great sorrow. Why? Why were they sorrowful? I believe it's because they only heard part of the story. They only heard part of the story. They heard that he would be betrayed and killed, but they didn't hear the part that on the third day he would rise again. And I think that's where so many of us stop. We stop at his crucifixion and we lose hope because we lose sight of his resurrection. I mean, and if God could raise his son from the dead, then that gives us hope that as he's pursuing our kids, as he's loving our kids, as he's loving us, we're hoping in the miracle-working God who performs miracles the size of the resurrection. And I will tell you this, there is no greater miracle than the resurrection. And God has the ability to raise people from the dead. Physically, spiritually, emotionally. And you know what? We may not know how it's going to work. We may not understand how it's going to come to fruition, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, God still has the power to resurrect lives. And we have to hold on to that. See, they heard betrayed and killed. They didn't hear the resurrection. And think about it. This is what we hear every day. It floods the news. It floods social media. We've lost. That's dead. This is gone. And that's where we stop. Let's play it to the end, because the end says this: though the reality of what we're experiencing is death, God is still a God that resurrects and brings life. And I can have hope in the midst of this death because my hope is in Jesus alone and his resurrection power. And so we need to temper our sorrow through the lens of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But then it goes on. It said, when they come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him. I love that statement. You should underline that. Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers?" Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free? Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first, and when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take it and give it to them for me and you." It just blows me away. Think about this. Talk about the provision of the Father. How it happens in the most peculiar way. I've done a lot of fishing. I've caught quite a few fish. I have never found a coin in the fish's mouth. Maybe I'm catching too small a fish, but I still have never found a coin in a fish's mouth. But you know what? First off, we kind of get it backwards. We begin at the end, and then we don't get back to the beginning. Because what's most important is this, the fact that Jesus anticipated. Because before he provided, what did he do? He anticipated Peter's questioning. So in that statement that says Jesus anticipated, what it is telling me is this, that Jesus himself is prepared for our questions. And we may have many of them. And you can ask Jesus, he's not afraid of them. His answer may be a bit peculiar. It's definitely going to require faith for you to get it. But he's not afraid of your questions. And I love that. Now, here's the interesting fact. So this is how you can win Bible trivia, because every once in a while you need to do that. This miracle here, the fishing miracle, is only recorded in the book of Matthew. So now you can win Bible trivia. What's that get you? Nothing. But you heard it here first. So... And what it deals with, though, is Jesus' kingship and the Father's heart. You see, Jesus affirms that he's a child of the king. And as a child of a king, he's not required to pay taxes. How comforting that must have been. But yet he pays the taxes anyway. Why? Because he cared about the other people. He cared about the people that are trying to trap him. He says, because I don't want to offend them, go fishing. You're thinking to yourself, okay, Jesus, these are the guys that want to kill you, and you don't want to offend them. Who cares if you offend them? This is how you can get them back. Like in your face, I don't have to pay taxes. But he doesn't. He says, because I don't want to offend them. You see, Jesus did all that he did to even pursue the people that were against him. He didn't try to antagonize him. You see, rabbis were exempt from paying this tax, which Jesus was. So were the priests in Jerusalem. But Jesus didn't claim a similar exemption. Instead, he instructed Peter, go fishing. I'm sure Peter loved it. Why? Because we know Peter was a fisherman. But let's think about this for a second. What would need to happen in order for this miracle to take place? Number one, Peter had to go fishing. Now, Peter was used to fishing by casting nets, not by casting a line with a hook on it. So for Peter to go fishing with a hook meant he had to humble himself to go fishing this manner. That he's going to go catch one fish, and that was all. Why? Because all he needed was one fish. And Jesus said that, take the first fish, open his mouth. So that's the first thing that had to take place. Second, a coin had to be lost in the sea. Somebody had to be disappointed. I lost my money. Okay. Third, a fish would then have to eat the coin and leave it in its mouth. Okay. Then the fish would have to bite the hook that Peter put in the water. And then Peter would have to reel it in. Finally, Peter would have to reach in his mouth and get the coin. Kind of a lot needed to happen in order for this to take place, don't you think? But what we see is that Jesus and Peter were both trusting in the Father's provision. By faith, they were trusting. And so I just want to leave you with a couple things. First off, you may never catch a fish and pull a coin out of its mouth. And that's okay. Because it's not about the fish. It's about what the fish represents. And that is what the Father can provide for you. And that is what you need when you need it. That's the first thing. Secondly, you can trust the heart of the Father. You can trust the Father's heart. A heart that is longing to provide for your needs. The heart of a Father that is persistent. A heart that is pursuing and pleased with his children whom he loves. Guys, you can trust the heart of the Father because you are the child that the Father chose to adopt.